Imagine living in a world where your only career was to marry well, where being a nice little girl meant never dreaming too big, never working too hard, and never thinking you could change the world. That was Britain in the early 1900s, a society ruled by men, built for men, and where women's ambitions were confined to the walls of their homes. But then, the unthinkable happened. World War I erupted. And in just a few short years, women who once stitched lace and poured tea were building bombs, driving trams, and saving soldiers on the front lines. It was the war that was said to liberate women. But did it really? Or was it just another illusion of progress, a promise that faded the moment the guns went silent? Let's uncover how the First World War truly transformed and failed to transform women's lives. At the start of the 20th century, Britain stood as one of the most powerful nations on Earth. Yet beneath its wealth and empire, millions lived in poverty, and inequality was everywhere. For women, life was even harder. They had few rights, few opportunities, and almost no control over their futures. Their main expectation? Marriage. Their main duty? Serving the home. Working-class women often toiled in domestic service or in factories under brutal conditions, earning barely half of what men made. There was little protection from abuse, no safety in the workplace, and almost no chance of escape. Britain was, without a doubt, a man's world. Then came August 1914. Britain entered the First World War, and over the next 4 years, nearly 5 million men enlisted or were drafted. With men gone to the front lines, the country faced a massive labor shortage. And suddenly, doors that had been closed to women began to open, not out of kindness, but out of necessity. Women filled jobs in transport, manufacturing, agriculture, and even the postal service. Before the war, only 18,000 women worked in transport. By 1918, that number had skyrocketed to over 117,000. For the first time, women were stepping into roles once considered impossible. One of the most dangerous yet vital jobs was in the munitions factories. To solve a shell shortage in 1915, Britain built huge factories where women made explosives day and night. They were called canaries, not because they sang, but because the TNT they handled turned their skin bright yellow. Exposure to those chemicals poisoned them slowly, and many didn't realize the risk until it was too late. Over 900,000 women worked in munitions during the war, facing deadly explosions like the one at Chilwell in 1918, which killed 134 workers and injured hundreds more. Despite the danger, women still earned about half of what men did. But many accepted it. They saw their work as a patriotic duty, a sacrifice for their country. Working women with children faced an almost impossible task. The government opened a few day nurseries, just over 100 by 1917, only for munitions workers. Most mothers relied on friends or family to care for their children. Society still saw these jobs as temporary measures, not a path to equality. Once the war was over, women were expected to simply return to their kitchens. By mid-war, women were demanding a bigger role, not just at home, but in service to the nation. In 1916, the government finally responded. 3 new women's branches were created: the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps in 1916, the Women's Royal Naval Service in 1917, and the Women's Royal Air Force in 1918. Over 100,000 women joined Britain's armed forces. They weren't fighting on the front lines, but they repaired vehicles, handled communications, and managed logistics. For many, it wasn't just duty, it was adventure. One woman recalled, "When I got hit in the Blitz, I decided if I was going to get knocked about, I'd rather do it where I expected it, in service." Another crucial role for women was nursing. Tens of thousands served as trained nurses or volunteers with the voluntary aid detachments, known as VADs. By By 1918, over 90,000 women were serving under the Red Cross, many near the front lines. Conditions were brutal. Nurses worked through mud, darkness, and shell fire, dragging the wounded from trenches and operating in makeshift hospitals. One nurse recalled unwrapping the bandages of a soldier's face, unsure if he even had one left beneath. She said, "Then I realized he was staring at me, waiting to see my reaction. So I smiled. I chatted. I made him laugh." Through courage and compassion, these women redefined what strength meant. Back home, a new form of freedom was emerging: women's football. Factories formed teams to boost morale and fitness, and the sport exploded in popularity. The Dick Kerr ladies team in Preston became legendary, with star player Lily Parr scoring over 1,000 goals and drawing massive crowds. But the success didn't last. In 1921, the Football Association banned women's matches, claiming the game was too rough for women. In truth, women's football had simply become too popular and too threatening to the men's game. The ban stayed in place until 1969. When the guns fell silent on November 11, 1918, victory came, but so did disappointment. Men returned home to reclaim their jobs, and women were pushed back into lower-paid domestic work. The message was clear: thank you for your service, now step aside. But some changes couldn't be undone. Over 700,000 men, nearly 9% of all British men under 45, had died. That meant more women were single, independent, and determined to make their own choices. In 1918, women over 30 finally won the right to vote. It wasn't full equality, but it was a start. The First World War didn't bring instant freedom for women. Many gains were rolled back and old attitudes returned. But something had shifted. Women had proved on factory floors, on battlefields, and in hospitals that they were more than capable. The foundations for future change had been laid. By the time the Second World War began in 1939, women were no longer an afterthought. They were an essential part of the war effort. As one veteran later said, "People were quick to criticize us, but we showed courage, and we proved what women could do." The Great War didn't just reshape nations. It quietly redefined what it meant to be a woman forever. Thanks for watching this episode. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more untold stories from World War I and beyond.